Elowen walked along the familiar trail, her bare feet touching the soft moss gently. She had always preferred walking this way. She felt the slow pulse of life running through the roots beneath her feet. The flowers leaned toward her as she passed, as if recognizing her as one of their own, because she was. Elowen was not born of a human womb, but of flowers and magic. Oberon had woven her from hyacinth petals, primrose, and oak leaves, the most beautiful flora in his garden. Oberon had worked for 28 days and 28 nights. He stitched form and consciousness together with ancient enchantments. Petal by petal, leaf by leaf, he built her form. It wasn't like molding clay. It was more like persuading the very essence of the forest to transform into something new. And in the center, where a human heart should beat, Oberon placed a single hyacinth petal, enchanted never to wither. This, he had whispered to her, shall be your heart. As long as it remains whole, you shall live. But should it shatter, you will return to what you were, flowers and nothing more. You are perfect, Oberon told her the day she opened her eyes for the first time. Created with a purpose. You are destined for Soren. And Elowen believed him. How could she not? Soren was all she knew of love. She spotted him ahead, leaning against an old apple tree. It was their spot, where they always met. Soren looked up when he heard her approach, and the smile that broke across his face made Elowen's petal heart race. He was handsome, blonde hair with not a strand out of place, amber eyes, a body strong and agile. But it was his smile she loved most. Soren was a shifter, and Elowen existed because Oberon had paid an ancient debt between their two families with her existence. I thought you'd forgotten me, he said, extending a hand. Never, she replied, placing her hand in his. He pulled her gently, seating her beside him. The roses near the creek were blooming. I wanted to pick some for you. She opened her other hand, revealing 3 perfect roses. Soren's eyes softened. You didn't have to. I wanted to. She wove one of the red roses into his hair, laughing when he feigned protest. There, now you look like a prince. Princes don't have claws, he teased, briefly flashing the sharp points he could extend from his fingertips at will. Then you are a wolf prince. Even better, he laughed, a rich, warm sound, and pulled her closer. She snuggled against his chest, listening to the strong, steady rhythm of his heart, her favorite sound in the entire world. The proof that he was real, alive, and hers. The kiss was sweet and slow, like spilled honey. Elowen felt herself melt into him, her fingers clutching his linen shirt. This was the love she was created for. This was her purpose. They stayed there under the apple tree until the sun began to set, and when Soren finally said goodbye, claiming he had matters to attend to, Elowen watched him leave with a strange feeling coiled in her chest. Chapter 1. That night, the forest seemed restless. The leaves shivered without wind, and branches knocked against one another as if trying to call out to Elowen. When a thrush landed near her and let out a short, urgent trill, she understood the warning instinctively. The bird took flight toward the east, and she followed. The forest rarely called without cause, and that was how she heard the voices. It wasn't unusual. The forest was vast, and many travelers crossed its paths, but there was something about the quality of these voices that made Elowen pause. She recognized one of them immediately, Soren. Her first instinct was to call out to him, to run to meet him as she always did. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the conspiratorial tone of his voice. Perhaps it was the second voice she heard next, female and seductive. Elowen moved silently through the undergrowth, her bare feet making no sound. She had learned from the creatures of the forest. When she got close enough, she hid behind a dense bush and peered through the branches. Soren was in a small clearing, but he wasn't alone. A woman was with him, tall and striking, with black hair falling in waves over her shoulders. Power practically radiated from her in palpable waves. She could feel the magic radiating from the woman, darker, sharper, more dangerous than her own. But it wasn't the woman's presence that made her petal heart clench painfully. It was the way Soren looked at her. It was the way his hands held her waist. It was the way he pulled her close and kissed her, passionately. Nothing like the kiss she'd received earlier. Elowen's world contained only beauty and kindness, no matter the situation. She did not know the bitter taste of pain. Her trusting nature led her to expect that everyone was friendly and that every story ended in happily ever after. Even with emotions running high, as tears fell, she took a deep breath, and her weeping passed as quickly as a summer storm. When they finally broke apart, the witch laughed, a low, sensual sound. "Soren, we have business to discuss." "Business can wait," he murmured, kissing her neck. "Not this time. We need to finalize the details of the plan. The Alpha King won't wait for our convenience." Alpha King? Elowen knew that title. Aldric, the ruler of the neighboring territory. The tyrant, Soren spat, his face twisting into a sneer. "Sitting on his fertile lands while the rest of us fight for crumbs, but not for much longer." "No," Morgana agreed, her violet eyes shining with malice. "Not when we frame him for the attack on the neutral lands. The others will turn against him, and when they fall upon Aldric, we will take his territories in the chaos." Soren finished, a predatory smile spreading across his face. "And your little flower doll?" Morgana asked casually, examining her nails. Soren laughed, but the sound was void of joy. "Elowen? She's harmless. Completely naive." "Then why keep her around?" Morgana asked. "Don't worry about her, Morgana. She was created by magic. Created, like a doll, a tool. She isn't even real. She's made of damn flowers." He laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. "Oberon gave me a mate who has no will of her own, who was literally molded to serve me. How could I love something like that?" Every word was a knife in Elowen's chest. She couldn't watch anymore. She couldn't. A twig snapped under her foot. "Did you hear that?" The woman's voice was now sharp, alert. Soren's eyes narrowed, and he turned his head sharply toward the bush where Elowen was hiding. "Elowen, you idiot." Soren's voice, closer now. "Why did you have to meddle?" She thought about running, but her body wouldn't obey. A hand grabbed her arm, spinning her around. Her voice came out weak, broken. You betrayed me, and you're planning something terrible against the Alpha King. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have seen any of this, but now you know too much." Soren raised something, a knife, silver gleaming in the moonlight. "I'm sorry, my dear, nothing personal." Elowen threw herself to the side, her reflexes saving her from a direct blow, but the blade still struck her, tearing through her shoulder, slicing through delicate skin made of petals. Pain exploded through her, unlike anything she had ever felt. Soren towered over her, preparing for the final blow, eyes wild with triumph and madness. Elowen closed her eyes, but what came was a roar. A roar so deep, so visceral, that it made the earth tremble beneath her. The creature collided with Soren, sending him flying. A black wolf. He was massive, his black fur shining like obsidian under the moonlight. The wolf positioned himself between Elowen and her attackers, snarling, the sound reverberating through her bones. Soren stumbled to his feet, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. "Alpha, you are out of your territory," he said, trying to sound brave but failing miserably. The wolf took a step forward, just one, but it was enough to make Soren recoil. "Let's go," the woman pulled at Soren. "We can't face him." "Not now." Morgana raised her hands, weaving spells. Magic black as ink spiraled around her, growing, pulsating. When it finally dissipated moments later, Soren and Morgana had vanished, leaving only the echo of malicious laughter. The wolf turned, looking for Elowen where he had last seen her, but the spot where she had been now held only wind and leaves. Chapter 2. Elowen ran through the forest, blind with pain and despair. There was no going back, even if she wanted to, for there was no path her eyes could see. A light snow was erasing any trace of her footprints. Branches scratched her skin, thorns tore her dress, and stones cut her bare feet. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony squeezing her chest. When she reached a small lake, she stopped. The mirror of water stretched out before her, perfectly still, reflecting the darkening sky. On the bank, iris flowers swayed gently in the breeze. Elowen burst onto the water's edge, and her legs finally gave way. She fell to her knees in the damp grass, gasping, shattered. A sob escaped her, small, but enough. Her tears were not salty. They were translucent, like dew. They had shaken her to her core, tearing her from the inside out, and she cried for everything, for the illusion of love Soren had created, for the betrayal she witnessed, for the cruel truth of her own existence. She cried until she had no more tears. The moon was rising now, reflecting on the calm surface of the lake, like a second world of silver. Elowen looked at her own reflection. smooth skin with a subtle glow that made her look as if she were always touched by sunlight. Around her, the forest watched in silence. In her grief, she didn't even notice the woodland creatures and magical beings gathering around. The trees bowed their branches in mourning. The flowers bowed their heads in sorrow. A deer emerged from the tree line, its dark eyes soft and understanding, but it kept a respectful distance. Even the wind seemed to whisper words of comfort she could no longer understand. "Why did you create me like this?" she whispered to the sky, to Oberon, to anyone who might be listening. "Why teach me to love if I could never be loved back?" There was no answer, only the silence of the forest and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Elowen remained by the lake, clutching her wounded shoulder as she began to drift into unconsciousness. The faint patter of paws on snow penetrated her dreams, and a soft warmth enveloped her. Aldric had followed her to the lake out of pure duty. Yes, that was it. Nothing more. He had gone because he needed to understand the extent of the conspiracy against his pack. He needed to hear what the wolves of Moonfall were saying, planning, fearing, and also perhaps, just perhaps because part of him was curious about the girl he had saved. He hadn't expected to find her crying. Aldric had arrived after sunset, keeping to the shadows, his presence hidden. It was easy when you knew how. Now she was fainting. Something strange happened in his chest, and Aldric moved before he thought. In an instant, he was out of the shadows, catching her before she fell. As he drew closer, he definitely hadn't expected to find her enchanting. As soon as her weight settled in his arms, a strange sensation ran across his skin. His pupils dilated, and a brief chill ran down the back of his neck, making the hair on his arms stand up. It was an automatic reaction, almost animalistic, the kind that occurred in those rare moments when a wolf's soul instantly recognized someone as its own. A feeling he pushed away the moment it surfaced. She was light in his arms, delicate. She smelled of wildflowers. Her lips had the natural color of roses, and her cheeks flushed like spring petals. Oberon had created her to be impossible to ignore, to be love at first sight, to be the kind of beauty that stopped hearts and inspired wars. And it worked. By the gods, it worked. What should I do with her? Good question. Aldric should simply leave her somewhere safe in the village. She wasn't his problem, but she had also seen the conspiracy. She had heard the plans. She had information he needed, and she was hurt. Aldric made a decision, probably a terrible decision. He would take her with him, and with that he disappeared into the night, carrying her unconscious form in his arms. Chapter 3. The horse's trot echoed through the night like a hurried drum. The thin snow continued to fall, melting as soon as it touched the Alpha's warm skin. Aldric kept the reins firm in one hand. With the other, he held Elowen's inert body against his chest. Twice, he looked down just to confirm she was still breathing. She was. Her chest rose and fell in a light, almost imperceptible rhythm. In the pale moonlight, Elowen's skin looked even more ethereal, almost translucent, as if she were made of moonlight itself. The cut on her shoulder, however, was anything but ethereal. Blood stained the torn fabric of her dress. "She is none of your business," he reminded himself, clenching his jaw, but he still loosened his coat and draped it over her shoulders, shielding her better from the biting cold. The great trees gradually gave way to dark wooden fences marking the pack's domain. Torches along the main road burned with flames protected by glass, casting golden reflections on the snow. In the distance, the stone fortress walls rose, severe and solid against the starry sky. Two guards in the towers lifted their noses to the wind, recognizing the Alpha's scent before they could even distinguish his shape. "Gates!" shouted one of them. Chains rattled, and the gates opened slowly. Aldric rode in without slowing much, crossing the inner courtyard to the stables. A figure was already waiting for him at the entrance, leaning against a rough stone pillar, arms crossed and wearing a smile that was half boredom, half mockery. "Well, look at that," the figure said, straightening up as the sight of the woman in his arms became clear. "You coming back injured, bleeding, or grumpy? I expected that. But coming back with a woman? Now you've exceeded all my expectations, little brother." Aldric pulled the reins, bringing the horse to a halt. He ignored the comment. "Hold the horse. I'll hold the horse." Hans repeated, arching an eyebrow. But you're going to have to explain why you're bringing an unconscious stranger, bleeding, smelling of magic, straight to our quarters. Aldric dismounted carefully, keeping Elowen firm against his chest. There was urgency in his movements, but no careless haste. He lifted her down as if every limb of hers were made of glass. Hans's gaze narrowed. Curious. Who is she? He asked, taking the horse's reins almost by reflex. A witness, Aldric replied, already turning toward the stairs that led into the fortress. A witness, Hans repeated, walking behind him, the sound of boots echoing on the stone. Usually you bring witnesses in chains, not in your arms. Aldric quickened his pace down the stone corridor, lit by torches. She heard the conspiracy, he said without looking back. She saw Soren and Morgana. She knows what they are planning against us. Hans whistled low. Moonfall finally showed its fangs. Aldric stopped abruptly in front of a wooden door reinforced with iron. He pushed it open with his shoulder, entering a large but austere room. The fireplace was still burning, casting heat and dancing shadows across the stone walls. There was a large, simple canopy bed, a chest at the foot, and a shelf with vials, books, and scrolls. His room. He crossed the space in a few strides, stooping carefully to deposit Elowen onto the bed. The contrast was stark, her all soft curves and delicacy amidst the roughness of the place. The blood on her shoulder clashed cruelly with the crisp sheets. Aldric adjusted the pillow under her head, brushed a lock of hair from her face stained by dried tears, and stepped back, as if only then realizing the intimacy of the gesture. Hans appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with the same insolent air as always. We need a healer. Get Hester. Tell her it's urgent. Hans studied him for a long second. Then he sighed, dramatically. Fine, Alpha, he said, emphasizing the title with a half-smile. I'll get Hester. But this conversation isn't over. He pointed his chin at Elowen, and I'm going to want the whole story. Aldric growled low. Out, Hans laughed, already moving away down the hall. Going, his voice echoed, fading away. Silence fell again as his brother's footsteps were lost in the distance. Aldric turned his gaze back to Elowen. She remained motionless, her breath still light, lashes casting small shadows on her cheeks. Seeing her like this, it was hard to believe she had gotten herself into the middle of a conspiracy. From the hallway, Hans's hurried steps approached again, accompanied by the sound of clinking glass vials. Brought Hester, Hans announced, appearing in the doorway with a lopsided grin. And before you ask, yes. I told her it's very important, extremely urgent, but totally professional and devoid of any emotional involvement. Hester, a woman with graying hair tied in a tight bun and eyes sharp as blades, entered behind him, ignoring the comment. Out of the way, Alpha, she said, passing Aldric without ceremony. If you brought her here alive, I won't let her die, whoever she is. Hans shot Aldric a look full of meaning. See? He whispered, barely containing his amusement. I haven't even started, and she's already presuming the same thing. Aldric turned his face, his hazel eyes flashing. Hans, Aldric warned, in a threatening tone. Right, I'm going. He backed away and disappeared down the hall, laughing to himself. Chapter 4. When Elowen woke up, she was alone. The chamber was strange. A high, vaulted ceiling arched above her. The air hummed with the dry, mechanical scent of civilization. Clean linens, snuffed candles, and the lingering trace of iron. Her left shoulder throbbed in rhythm with her heart. She was lying in a huge bed, canopied and carved with 100 tiny, snarling wolves. Someone had positioned her on her side, and the wound was bandaged with precise care. She sat up, the world spinning and then righting itself. Her hair, never combed before, was now braided tightly, as if the gesture could keep her whole. A beam of light rested at the foot of the bed, illuminating dust motes rising in slow processions. A firm knock broke the silence. She shrank back, expecting Soren's voice, but it wasn't him. The door opened, and a man entered. He carried a tray full of linen, glass vials, and a bundle of herbs tied with twine. He crossed the room in long strides, every step measured, almost resentful of the necessity. He set the tray on the side table and finally turned to her. Thick waves of dark hair fell effortlessly over his forehead. Softening the intensity of his hazel eyes and rugged scruff darkened his sharp jawline. He wore a heavy cloak lined with thick fur, secured by leather belts across his torso, and gloves that left only his fingertips exposed. awake?" he said, his voice flat. Elowen nodded. The man sat on the edge of the bed, at a respectful distance. He undid the linen bundle to reveal a clean bandage and a viscous green ointment. He dipped 2 fingers into the salve and motioned for her to come closer. She obeyed. He removed the soiled cloth from her shoulder with clinical precision. The wound was open, jagged at the edges, but he showed nothing, only a tightening of his jaw, a flash of something undecipherable in his eyes. "It will scar," he said, spreading the ointment on the wound. His touch was surprisingly gentle. His fingers brushed her collarbone as he worked. The touch was nothing, and yet it sent currents of cold and heat through her body. She watched him, searching for clues in the way he moved his mouth, how his brows furrowed. He did not meet her eyes, not once. "Where am I?" she asked, emboldened by the silence. Aldric wrapped the wound with the clean bandage, pulling it tight enough to sting. "In my castle. You are under my protection in Caledon." Even those who never left the forest knew the name. Merchants were always repeating, "Don't take the North Road, it's the path to Caledon." Children played games of run from the Alpha of Caledon, the tyrant. Even the birds stealing breadcrumbs carried fragments of the stories in their warped songs. "The Alpha's fortress," she murmured, before she could stop herself. The corner of his mouth lifted, but it didn't quite become a smile. He secured the bandage, then picked up a small cup of water. "Drink," he ordered, more softly. Elowen obeyed. The water was cold, sweetened with honey and mint. She tried to thank him, but the words failed her. He watched her drink, his posture rigid, every muscle in his neck tense. Elowen looked away. "Soren and Morgana, they want to frame you." Aldric nodded, dryly. "I know." He flexed his fingers as if he wanted to transform but was holding himself back. "They want war. They think I am too strong for a direct confrontation, so they resort to games." He said games as if the word tasted like ash. "It is what they do best." He stood abruptly to leave. Without thinking, Elowen grabbed his sleeve. Aldric looked at her hand, then at her. For an instant, something raw and unguarded passed over his face and vanished, replaced by his usual coldness. "Thank you," she repeated, quieter. He hesitated. "No need to thank me. You were injured." "It is my duty as Alpha to protect my subjects," he said, slipping from her touch. "Rest. Tomorrow I will request your presence at the council to present your version of what you witnessed. I need you to tell us everything you know." Finally, he turned to the door without another word, his movements quick. As he left the room, he paused with his hand on the doorknob. When he turned, he found Hans standing a few steps away, arms crossed, eyebrow arched. "You're turning red," his brother observed, amused. "Did something happen?" Aldric walked past him without slowing his pace. "Shut up, Hans." But his heart was beating a little too fast for someone who claimed not to care. Through the window, Elowen could see the black outline of an owl perched on the sill, motionless as if it were part of the frozen night. Elowen got out of bed and walked to the mirror. Her shoulder was already healed. Her kind heals faster than humans. But there was a different pain growing in her chest, a void opening between her ribs, where her heart should be. Except she didn't have a heart. "You have 40 days. Oberon's memory whispered in her mind. 40 days to be truly loved. If not, the magic unravels. You return to what you were, flowers and nothing more." The owl tilted its head and flapped its wings once. The sound was like a book closing. The trees brushed harder. "Come back," they whispered. "Come back before it's too late. The forest can protect you. Here, between stone and iron, you will wither." But she couldn't go back. She didn't want to. She felt she hadn't been created to be just flowers and nothing more. "I won't fade. I won't wither," she thought, and she knew that voice was hers. It didn't come from the forest. It didn't come from anywhere else. It was Elowen. The countdown beat in her ears now, rhythmic as a sundial. 40 days. The owl flew away. The trees stopped brushing. And there was something in her that had finally awakened, and it did not intend to be silenced. Chapter 5. Elowen descended the stone stairs, gripping the banister as if it were an anchor, and found him there. Hans walked toward her down the corridor, playing a small flute that made no sound, merely dancing between his fingers with the agility of a card sharp. He was handsome in a disarming way, with clear eyes and a smile far too ready for someone who carried the same blood as a feared alpha. His dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, and he seemed incapable of standing still for more than 3 seconds. Finally, a formal introduction. We were stuck with a dramatic encounter, fainting, and blood. I prefer less dramatic introductions, honestly. He gave an exaggerated bow, one hand on his chest, the flute vanishing into some invisible pocket. Charmed to meet you. Hans, don't start. Came another voice, dry, from behind Elowen. She turned. Aldric was there. She hadn't heard his footsteps. I see you've already met. Hans is our resident bard. My brother, Aldric said, approaching, his presence filling the space between the 3 of them. Musician, storyteller, and perpetual headache. Artist, Hans corrected with a charming smile. The word you're looking for is artist. And, occasionally, misunderstood genius. Aldric shot his brother a warning look. He turned to Elowen. The council is waiting. Aldric was too close, his shoulder almost brushing hers. Elowen followed him, feeling Hans's eyes on her back like a light but persistent breeze. When she glanced back, the bard winked, his lips forming the silent words, "It'll be fine." The council hall was a circle of stone. A round table of black oak occupied the center, surrounded by heavy chairs. 8 were occupied. "This is Elowen," Aldric began without preamble. She witnessed Soren and Morgana's conspiracy. She is going to tell us exactly what she heard. The elder's eyes turned to her. They were not friendly. Elowen took a deep breath, and then she spoke. Every word that left her mouth felt like it tore at her throat, not because it was hard to remember, but because of the cruelty of giving voice to it. She described the clearing, the betrayal, the plan to frame the Alpha King. When she finished, the hall seemed smaller, tighter. No one spoke for a moment. Then, the gray-bearded elder cleared his throat. "It is a convenience story," he said. "Damning for Moonfall, useful for us." His eyes analyzed her coldly. "And you were Soren's mate? He tried to kill you, you say. But what if that was part of the plan? What if she is here to spy?" He interlaced his hands on the table. The other elders murmured in agreement, their eyes now like barbs. "Are you suggesting she's a spy?" he said bluntly. "I am considering all possibilities," the elder replied, unmoved. Enough. Aldric's word cut the air like a blade. Everyone fell silent. The Alpha leaned his forearms on the table, projecting his body slightly forward. His gaze was no longer distant. It was sharp, focused, directed not at Elowen, but at the elders. "Soren tried to kill her," he said, every syllable heavy. The elders shifted, uncomfortable. "You can question her origin, whatever you like," Aldric continued, "but do not question the fact that he raised a blade against his own mate. That is a violation of ancient law." His voice dropped lower, and it is unforgivable. A heavy silence fell over the hall. His hazel eyes swept over each elder, a silent challenge. "I brought her here. She is under my protection, and anyone who wishes to question that is questioning my judgment." Elowen stood motionless, the elders' heads lowered, one after another. Finally, they nodded slowly. Chairs scraped. People stood up. The tension dissolved slowly, transforming into murmured orders and mental to-do lists. Hans was the last to rise, standing beside his brother. Before leaving, he shot Elowen a small smirk, not mocking, not flirtatious, just conspiratorial, as if to say, "You survived the first round." She tried to return it, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. One by one, everyone left the hall. Once in the corridor, Elowen didn't know what to say. The words clumped in her throat. She was a creature of flowers in a place of stone and iron. She didn't know how to grow here. "I need," she started, then stopped. "A bit of air." Aldric turned. His eyes studied her for a second that stretched out. "Come with me," he said. "I'm not going back in there," she replied too quickly. "I'm not taking you back to the hall." His tone was calm, irrefutable. He tilted his head slightly, indicating a side corridor. Outside. She let him guide her. The back door creaked, and the cold afternoon air wrapped around them. Outside, the world was different. The sky was beginning to tinge with lilac, and the estate spilled out into rolling hills and dark trees. Elowen stopped for a second, like someone needing to process so much beauty at once. "You have a lake," she whispered, breaking into a small, enchanted smile. "It's not mine." Aldric cleared his throat, embarrassed. Well, technically it is, but it was here long before my pack, so I suppose we belong to it." Elowen looked at the water with an affection that disarmed him. "That is a beautiful thing to say." He shrugged, trying to pretend it was nothing. They followed a dirt path lined with wildflowers that seemed to lean a little too much towards them as they passed. A polished wooden boat waited at the lake's edge, tied to a post. He extended a hand to help her aboard. Elowen hesitated, then accepted. She stepped into the boat with delicate care. The wood creaked softly, accepting her light weight. Aldric sat at the prow, stiffly. "Shall we?" he confirmed, feigning custom. "If you don't mind risking it with an inexperienced captain, I trust you." She said it with such certainty that he had to look away at the knot securing the boat. The vessel slid over the water. As he untied the rope, a light wind blew, just enough to push the boat further toward the center, where the trees leaned in as if wanting a better look. A school of glimmerfish approached, swimming in circles around the boat. For a few seconds, all that could be heard was the soft sound of wood cutting water. The mansion in the distance, the other buildings, and even the world seemed to have been left behind. That was when the wind decided to meddle a little more. Not a gale, just a stubborn gust that came from the right direction, under the brim of Elowen's hat, a simple hat with a light ribbon tied around it. The brim trembled, lifted, and in a single decided gesture, the hat flew off. "My hat!" she exclaimed, instinctively raising her hand to her head. The hat described a perfect arc, landing very close to them in the water, and began to drift away slowly. Aldric laughed, his body leaning forward slightly to try and reach it. The boat responded with a gentle warning rock. He stretched his arm further. His fingers got close, almost touching the brim, which moved away a little more, floating on the glassy surface. The boat didn't capsize immediately. First, it rocked, a warning. Then Aldric stretched further, and the boat protested with a creak of wood, and the water welcomed them. The shock was silent. The water was cold. Elowen sank, eyes open, seeing the sun refract into fragments. There was a short fright, green darkness for a second, and then she emerged, coughing, her hair plastered to her face. She blinked, wiping the water from her eyes. Aldric was less than a handspan away, soaked, shirt clinging to his body, hair falling into his eyes, looking startled. He let out a breath, clearly relieved when he verified she was okay. She laughed softly. He returned it, and the sound mixed with the gentle lapping of the water. The boat, now capsized, floated a few meters away, upside down. And then a wave came. Not high or dramatic, just a small ripple of water that pushed them together as if giving a little help. Their knees touched beneath the surface. Their hands floated close, almost meeting. Now, they were very close. Aldric's chest almost touched hers. Their breaths mingled, a little too fast to blame solely on the fall into the water. Aldric held his breath. The lake seemed to wait. "Elowen," he began, low, as if any louder volume would break something. She looked at him in a way that didn't help at all, eyes wide, sincere, a shine mixing nervousness and expectation. He could have leaned in. That was all that was missing. Instead, he shifted slightly and brushed a wet lock of hair from her forehead. Just that. The water around them swirled in a frustrated little eddy, almost laughable. Beside them, the boat turned slowly, as if coming back, offering a practical exit from that suspension. The hat had been gently returned by the water and hovered nearby, as if just watching. He pulled the boat, flipped it back over with effort, and braced his hand for her to climb in first. Elowen accepted, their hands grasping each other for too long to be just for support. She sat down, soaked, still smiling, without realizing it, and the lake, wisely, took them back to the dock without asking any more questions. In the distance, Hans watched the scene and as he walked away, was already mentally rehearsing the melody for his next song. Chapter 6. Elowen was sitting by the window, watching the forest dissolve into shadows when the door opened. She held her breath for an instant, hoping to see Aldric. It wasn't Aldric. It was Hans, leaning against the doorframe as if the room were his lute slung over his shoulder, and a smile that promised trouble. "Excuse me," he said, not waiting for an answer, entering like a good-natured hurricane and throwing himself into the nearest chair. "So, let's talk about you and my brother." Elowen blinked, surprised. "There is nothing to talk about." Hans arched an eyebrow and began to strum the lute softly, the notes filling the comfortable silence of the room. "Ah, but there is." He pointed with his chin around the room. "You are in his bedroom. He carried you here personally. And this morning, when you came down the stairs, the first thing he did was place himself at your side. Quite protective. He was just being hospitable, she ventured, feeling her face heat up. Hans laughed, a full and genuine sound. Sure, because Aldric is famously known for his warm hospitality toward humans. That's why he has so many regular guests. He paused dramatically, his smile widening. Oh, wait. You are the first in, what, 100 years? That doesn't mean anything, she murmured, more defensively than she intended. It means something, yes, Hans insisted, leaning forward, eyes shining with amusement and sincere curiosity. Aldric does nothing without a reason. And the reason for keeping you here isn't just information about conspiracies. He could very well have interrogated you and sent you away. Elowen felt her heart race in a strange way. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something else, something she couldn't name yet, like a new season about to begin. What are you implying exactly? She asked, trying to sound firm. Me? Hans shrugged, innocent. I'm not implying anything. He strummed a melancholic chord, the sound lightly scratching the air. I'm just stating facts. My brother, the powerful Alpha, the terror of the North, is interested in you. And I really don't know if that is marvelously romantic or terribly tragic. Perhaps both. Elowen looked away toward the window. The forest was now almost just outlines, a sea of merging shadows. The world seemed much bigger than the morning before, bigger and more dangerous, but also fascinating. Hans watched her for a moment as if weighing her thoughts, then tapped lightly on the side of the lute, changing his tone. Anyway, he said with sudden lightness, you had a horrible day. Interrogation, mysterious threats. He made a theatrical grimace. That calls for proper medicine. Medicine? She looked at him, suspicious. Mead, Hans declared solemnly. And music. And maybe apple pie, if old Irma is in a good mood. He leaned in, conspiratorial. I'm going to the tavern in a bit. The lower village is close, just down the hill. Noisy place, full of gossips, terrible for secrets, perfect for meeting the world. He smiled. Come with me. Elowen hesitated. To the tavern? Inside, however, something sparked. An ancient curiosity, stifled by years trapped between roots and petals within the safety of the forest. She had always heard stories, human laughter, out-of-tune songs, crowded tables, but she had never seen any of it up close. As a flower, the world beyond the trees was a distant echo. Now, sitting in a stone room with a smiling bard in front of her, it seemed that echo was finally taking shape. I can't, she began. By reflex. I don't know if I should. Of course you can, Hans countered immediately with the firm logic of someone who always causes trouble. The world doesn't end at this fortress door. And you clearly need to see something different. She bit her lip, heart beating fast. The idea of going out, of walking among people, of seeing, hearing, feeling all that. It scared and attracted her at the same time. Aldric would never allow it, she murmured. Aldric doesn't need to know, Hans retorted, rolling his eyes. Before she could respond, the door opened again. This time, it was Aldric, looking from Hans to Elowen with clear suspicion. What are you doing here? He asked his brother. Serenading, Hans replied innocently. Every lady needs music after a traumatic day. Get out. So moody. See? Hans stood up, holding his lute like a shield. He began to sing, improvising.
He says it's just for information, purely pack investigation. But brother dear, we all can tell, you're under quite a different spell. And if you growl, I'll sing this at the feast. Ha 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 ha!
Aldrich stared at him as if seriously considering throwing the lute out the window. Hans left before Aldrich could react, but not before giving an exaggerated wink to Elowen. Aldrich closed the door with a long sigh. He leaned against it, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if the simple fact of Hans existing was reason enough for a migraine. He is a headache with a lute, he repeated, more to himself than to her. Elowen bit her lip, fighting the smile that insisted on appearing. A few minutes later, the doorknob turned slowly. Hans poked his head through the crack, eyes shining. He was called to the war room, he whispered, entirely too satisfied with the coincidence. What a convenient tragedy. Are you ready? He held out his hand. She placed hers in his, and they snuck out. The tavern was a rustic wooden building, slightly crooked, with a sign hanging from rusty chains and a smoking lantern at the door. From inside came the muffled sound of laughter, loud voices, clinking glasses, and an out-of-tune flute trying to keep up with the song. Hans opened the door and entered as if he owned the place. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the smell of beer, grease, and smoke. The floor, covered in trampled sawdust, crunched under their soles. A fireplace held a lazy flame, illuminating walls blackened by time. A barmaid passed them with a tray of mugs. Hans, if you're playing, pay what you owe from last time, she grumbled without stopping. I will pay with art, he retorted. The highest form of currency. Art doesn't buy kegs, she shot back, but there was a trace of a laugh at the corner of her mouth. Hans turned to Elowen. Sit there. He pointed to a table in the corner, not hidden, but a little removed from the thick of the crowd. It's the best spot, she obeyed, still looking at everything like someone who had walked into a dream. The barmaid reappeared. What'll it be? Elowen stared at her, lost. What do you have? Ale, mead, wine? The woman began to list. She stopped, evaluating Elowen. For a beginner. Flower wine. Flower? The word came out almost reverent. Petals fermented with honey. It's sweet, she shrugged. Elowen looked at Hans, who was already setting up in a corner with his lute. Flower wine, she decided. A glass or a pitcher? Elowen hesitated. What do normal people order? A pitcher, the barmaid answered dryly. Then, a pitcher. The barmaid brought the flower wine, and Elowen's lack of experience showed immediately. She drank too fast, her petal skin gaining a deeper shade of pink with every sip. Her movements became uncoordinated, and the delicate posture she usually maintained dissolved little by little as the wine took effect. In the hall, Hans began to play. No epic drama, a lively melody, an easy chorus, lyrics slightly indecent enough to draw tired laughter. Some people banged cups to the rhythm. Others pretended not to care, but their feet tapped the beat on the floor. Hans improvised verses about the innkeeper, about the butcher's dog. Coins began to clink near his feet. More wine. You haven't even paid for the first one, the man complained. I am paying with poetry. Hans pointed to the lute.
Why'd anyone buy wine with money from their poetry fees? You ask and I reply with ease. Without the wine no one would stay to listen to my words all day. Wine buys the ears, the hearts, the time, makes poetry worth a dime. So I trade my rhymes for a cup so fine, for without the wine there's no patience for lines.
Some laughed. The innkeeper grumbled but brought the drink anyway. At the table, Elowen's pitcher was emptying at a dangerous pace. The heat in her chest spread to her shoulders, her neck, her cheeks. She felt her body light as if floating slightly above the chair. The voices around her began to sound funny. A laugh at the neighboring table made her laugh along, even without hearing the joke. She laughed at the way an old man banged his cup on the table, at the off-key flute missing the note, at her own laughter. Hans appeared shortly after, sweaty, animated, eyes shining from the makeshift stage and the alcohol. How is your first visit to the terribly mediocre world of humans? He asked, pulling up a chair. It's loud, she said, giggling, but it's good. I like seeing people talking loudly, complaining about life. Now you understand the essence of civilization, he celebrated. Let's toast. He raised his glass. To freedom from my brother's gloomy fortress. It was at roughly that point that the tavern door opened with a decided creak. Aldric's eyes swept the room. They found Hans first, laughing. Then they found Elowen. His jaw tightened. He crossed the room with a calm, dangerous stride, sawdust muffling the sound of his boots. He didn't push anyone, yet people moved aside to make a path. He stopped beside their table. Aldric ignored Hans. He looked at Elowen. She blinked, trying to focus, her face flushed, her smile a bit loose. Aldric, she murmured. surprised and genuinely happy. You came. He took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the glass, the half-empty pitcher, the way she was slumped in the chair. Stand up, he asked, not rudely, but leaving no room for argument. We are going back. She tried to stand on her own. The floor tilted slightly. The chair dragged. Aldric caught her by the arms before she lost her balance. Her heart raced, not from the wine, but from something else that had been growing since the day he brought her from the forest. Without thinking, exactly like a flower tilting its head toward the sun, without asking permission, she grabbed the collar of his shirt. Hans's eyes went wide, the lute slipping a little in his lap. Oops. Elowen pulled Aldric down and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was a bit crooked, warm, decided. Aldric stood motionless for an instant, rigid with surprise, his fingers still gripping her arms tightly to keep her upright. The world around them didn't stop. Someone laughed at something else. Glasses clinked, hands murmured something amused, but for the two of them, the rest simply blurred. He didn't pull her closer, but he didn't push her away either. And that, for Aldric, said a lot. When they separated, Elowen's eyes widened at her own boldness. He was breathing faster, his gaze hooked on hers. Hans put a hand over his mouth, making a sweeping gesture. I didn't see anything, he whispered. Aldric straightened up. We are leaving, he said, brooking no discussion. He paid the innkeeper, tightened his hand on Elowen's elbow, and guided her out. Hans stayed behind, giving an exaggerated bow to an imaginary table. Thank you, thank you. The night ends here, my friends. I must depart. Chapter 7. The way back to the castle happened under a sky filled with stars, with Hans whistling softly ahead of them. The warmth of the wine began to dissipate from Elowen's body faster than it would for a normal human. Her heart still beat fast, but now it wasn't the drink's fault. Neither of them spoke for a while. The stars hung high, the village shrinking behind them, the castle growing ahead like an ancient shadow. Finally, they reached the castle. Aldric stopped before her bedroom door, both reluctant to end that moment of closeness. We're here, he said, in a tone too low to be merely informative. The nearest torch cast a warm halo over them, isolating them in a small circle of light. Elowen nodded, hand already on the doorknob, but she didn't turn it. The silence between them stretched, full of everything left unsaid at the tavern, and of what had been done. This is your room, she commented, realizing the obvious suddenly. Was, he corrected, opening the door. She entered. The fireplace was out, but the brazier still held a remnant of heat. Shadows danced around the simple, sturdy furniture. Large bed, table, a wardrobe, an armchair near the window. Aldric stood at the door, as if not wanting to advance too far into the space she occupied. Where are you sleeping? Elowen asked, turning to face him. He shrugged as if it didn't matter. Guest rooms. War room. Wherever. But this is your room, she insisted. His ears almost seemed to heat up for a second. He looked away. You needed a safe place. I don't mind staying elsewhere. It's not a problem. She watched him, her chest tightening for a strange reason. And why don't you stay? She asked, her voice quieter but firm. The silence that followed seemed alive. Aldric lifted his gaze to her, slowly. Something changed in his eyes. It was like being back in that exact moment he saw her for the first time, still covered in tears. Aldric stood motionless in the hallway, hand resting on the stone wall. He felt it, silent, impossible to deny, the bond pulling like a thread tied to his heart. Not so soon, not now. But nature does not care what he wants, and the wolf inside him was howling a single word, mate. He took a step forward almost without realizing it. The distance between them shrank. The air seemed to grow denser. Elowen. He tried to speak, but his voice came out too hoarse. She stared at him, eyes wide, whole, sober. If you don't want to stay, she said, in a threat of a voice, just say so. It was almost funny, her thinking he was the one who needed sparing. Aldric took another step closer. Now, he could see the pattern of veins under her skin, the subtle shimmer of magic, the way her chest rose and fell rapidly. She felt her own heart give a beat so strong it almost hurt. He raised a hand, hesitant, and lightly touched her arm. Her entire body reacted, pupils dilating. She was his mate. In a way no custom, no political vow, no alpha strategy could undo. Aldric tilted his face slowly, like someone approaching a precipice they know they are going to jump off. Elowen closed her eyes for a second. Their breaths mingled. His lips were a breath away from hers when he saw it, so close the soft light of the brazier outlined every detail of her skin. On her neck, just below the jawline, small lines spread out, fine as veins on a drying petal. They hadn't been there the day he found her, nor the night he carried her to this room. A cold sensation replaced the heat for an instant. Aldric frowned, instinctively pulling back a finger's width. "What is this?" he murmured, his tone changing. Elowen opened her eyes, confused by the sudden shift. She followed his gaze. Her hand rose instinctively to her own neck, trying to cover the marks. Too late. Elowen followed his gaze and, by instinct, pulled the fabric back, trying to cover it. "It's nothing." "Elowen," he cut in, firm now in a different way. "That wasn't like that before." He raised his hand again, this time touching the lines with his fingertips, with an almost fearful delicacy. She retreated half a step, as if a little distance could hide the inevitable. Aldric didn't hold her, but he didn't take his eyes off her either. "What is happening to you?" The silence weighed heavy. "Aldric, I." She gripped the fabric tightly, as if she could hide the marks from herself too. "I don't know if I want to talk about this. You can trust me." His voice steadied, the Alpha's voice now. "That isn't a normal scar. And it wasn't like that when I brought you from the forest." Elowen stayed silent for a second, looking for a way to say it. There was no beautiful way, so she chose the true one. "Have you ever heard of the enchanted stories of people created by magic? Creatures of the forest," she began, her voice strangely calm. Aldric frowned. "Aldric, I was made, not born." The lines under her skin looked like veins, blue, delicate, like fine roots spreading from a wound. "Oberon, the wizard, created me in his garden." She continued slowly, like someone walking on thin ice, petal by petal. "He wove me with ancient magic until I existed." She looked up, expecting to see rejection for the spilled truth. She wasn't real. She found none of that. "You are made of flowers?" Aldric said, as if testing the words carefully. Elowen's voice dropped a tone. "Yes. I was made for a purpose, for someone. I was made for Soren." The name sounded strange there, in the stone corridor, far from Moonfall. A living gift, a loyal adornment. The smile that surfaced was small and tired. "Oberon molded me to be everything Soren wanted." She swallowed hard. "I was created with a single destiny, to stay by his side." The word came out as if it had been rehearsed a lifetime. Aldric clenched his fists at his sides. "These marks," Aldric stepped half a pace closer, gaze fixed on her shoulder, "are because of that?" She nodded slowly. "They started lightly, almost invisible, after I left Moonfall. I thought it was just exhaustion. But," she swallowed dryly, "the further I got from the life destined for me, the more they grew. It's as if the spell that brought me into existence is collecting the bill." She looked again at the lines spreading from her shoulder. "Oberon warned me. I had 40 days, and I feel it, here." She touched her chest, right in the center, like something is weakening, undoing the stitches. 40 days to surrender to love. If not, the magic unravels. I return to what I was, flowers and nothing more. For a moment, no one spoke. Aldric took another step, slow, as if approaching a wounded animal. She held his gaze for a few seconds longer than she considered safe. "Anyway," she said softly, "now you know that I am an enchanted one, that I am not real." The last word almost dissolved in the air. Aldric took a deep breath, chest rising and falling slowly, as if deciding something within himself. Finally, a light touch, warm fingers against delicate skin, guiding her face to look at him. "You seem very real to me," he said, low, husky, every syllable heavy with truth. The air seemed thin. Elowen blinked slowly, lashes brushing against each other. He tilted his face, and his lips touched hers with softness. In the dark, Elowen felt Aldric's heart beating against hers, and for a moment imagined that hers beat too. Perhaps, just perhaps, the love she felt for him was enough to keep her whole. "I don't want you to go," she smiled, a trembling but genuine smile. "I don't want to go either," Aldric whispered, his forehead resting on hers. The night wrapped around them, and for a moment, the outside world and its worries disappeared. Chapter 8. The sun had barely broken the horizon when the drums echoed through the walls of Caledon. A beat resonated in the stones, deep and prolonged, spreading through the corridors, climbing towers, descending stairs, reaching the inner courtyard and the ramparts. It was the call of war, ancient, rarely used, but recognized by every wolf-blood that inhabited Caledon. Aldric awoke, and before the second beat, he was already standing, donning armor of leather reinforced with black iron plates, eyes alert and distant. The bell sounded again, closer, more urgent. Elowen woke with a start. The previous night seemed like a fragile dream, but now reality burst in like a blade. Aldric turned to Elowen, who sat up in bed, sheets falling like petals around her. He crossed the room in a few strides. Without the alpha pose, without the command distance, Aldric knelt beside the bed and took her hands in his. "Elowen," he murmured, voice hoarse with urgency. "It must be Soren and Morgana. I was informed yesterday in the war room they are approaching, and they won't stop until they bring me down. I have to go." "I know," she said, soft but firm. "I understand, Aldric." Her lips curved into a sad half-smile. "And I admire you for it." "When this is over," he whispered, eyes fixed on hers, "you will plant your garden on the hills, flowers no one else has seen. Hans will compose bad songs about us, and I will pretend to hate them. I will teach you to ride, to hunt in the moon shadows, and every night I will remind you that you are real, that you are my mate." Dewy tears sprang to her eyes, but she smiled. "And if time runs out before you return?" Her voice cracked. "What if I can't hold on?" "Elowen," he breathed, as if the name were a prayer. "Listen to what I say now." His throat worked, hard, as if those words had blades. "I love you." His eyes didn't waver. "I love you," he repeated, lower, firmer. "I knew from the moment I first saw you. I felt it in my bones. You're my mate. I've known it since that first instant, and I refuse to accept that magic has the final say over you. When I return, we will solve this together." Aldric raised a hand and placed it on the back of her neck. The kiss that followed wasn't hurried, nor too delicate. It was urgent and yet careful. Elowen grabbed his armor as if wanting to anchor him there, keep him by force. "Come back to me," she asked, voice a silken thread. "I will come back. No matter what happens, I will find a way back to you," he swore, standing up. One last look, burning her from the inside, and then he was gone, the door slamming like thunder. Elowen lay motionless in bed for a few seconds, the taste of the kiss still burning on her lips. Outside, the bell continued to echo, calling men to war, wolves to blood, worlds to the edge of the abyss. She brought a hand to her chest. The place where the petal heart lay seemed to ache in a strange way, as if one of the invisible stitches were being pulled. "Come back to me," she repeated in a low voice, to an empty room. As an answer, she received only the distant echo of drums. Without the Alpha, without the main pack, the corridors echoed too emptily. Some youths, elders, and non-combatants moved like nervous shadows, carrying supplies, checking stocks, murmuring prayers to ancient gods. That day, the sky turned a purplish gray. A distant thunder rumbled. She wondered if it was a storm or magic. At nightfall, she finally heard it. Not the sound of war, but the tolling of the wall bell in a different pattern, the signal announcing return. Elowen ran down. Caledon's main gate opened slowly. Lanterns were raised, torches lit, the courtyard filled with tall, moving shadows. The first to enter were the scouts, clothes torn, some with wounds hastily bandaged. Then groups of warriors, some limping, others supporting comrades. The smell of blood and hot metal dominated the air. Elowen searched for Aldric in every face. She didn't find him. A cold knot formed in her throat. Caledon's beta strode past, organizing the arrival, shouting rapid orders. Noticing Elowen, he gave a brief salute, but the way he averted his eyes felt like a terrible warning. A little behind, finally, she saw Hans. He came limping, unmounted, face stained with soot and a cut on his eyebrow. His eyes, however, were much older than the night before. Elowen advanced toward him. "Hans!" He stopped upon hearing her, but for a second he didn't raise his face. He seemed to be preparing for something. When he finally looked at her, she saw it. Guilt and pain. "Where is he?" she cut in, direct. "Where is Aldric?" Hans took a deep breath as if the courtyard air had become too thick. "Let's get out of the way," he murmured, looking around. "Not here." She followed him to a less crowded corner near a side stable where the noise of the arrival muffled whatever was to be said. "Speak," she insisted. Hans wiped a hand over his face, dragging some dried blood with it. "Our pack won," he began, voice low. "They managed to break Moonfall's lines. Soren was captured. Morgana, too. The field belongs to Caledon now." She blinked, stunned that the word "won" didn't match the emptiness inside her chest. "Then why isn't he here?" Her voice trembled for the first time. Hans closed his eyes for a second. "Because," he swallowed hard. "When Morgana realized she had lost, she did what desperate sorcerers do. She cast the most dangerous spell she had at hand. Not against the army, against the Alpha." Elowen felt her hands sweat. "What kind of spell?" No one could say exactly. He spoke slowly, as if every word weighed heavily. They just saw runes lighting up under his feet. A sort of circle, as if it opened a hole between the stones. Light shot up, shadows closed around, and his fingers tightened as if holding something invisible. "He is gone, Elowen." She felt a strange nausea, as if the ground had shifted 2 inches to the side. "That doesn't," her voice failed, "that doesn't mean he died." Hans looked at her, eyes red. "We searched for him," he said, pressing the words. "In human form, in wolf form, with trackers. We couldn't find his scent anymore. No trace of wolf energy, nothing. He is gone completely." Elowen swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" "What are you talking about?" "Aldric is no longer among us, Elowen." The sentence came out with difficulty. He was taken by the magic. The world around seemed to step back from Elowen. The sounds of the courtyard, the wounded, the returning wolves, everything became distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. "No," she said, first as a whisper, then firmer, "no." Hans took half a step toward her, hand raised, ready to catch her if she fainted. "He promised me." Her eyes shone, but not just with tears, with fury. "He said he would come back. Aldric isn't the type to break promises." Hans took a deep breath and hugged her, his own voice trembling. "His name will be taken to the stone circle tomorrow, to the memorial," he murmured. "They will carve the headstone. He will be honored." She ran a hand over her neck, feeling the blue veins a little more spread out, burning under her skin, and Hans watched her in silence. Chapter 9. The stone circle atop the hill received 20 names the next day, among them the name of Aldric. Elowen climbed the hill with Hans by her side. Every step seemed heavier than the last. The bluish marks on her skin advanced, drawing delicate little roots along the sides of her neck and the beginning of her shoulder. In the center of the circle, a tall stone had been freshly polished. An artisan was finishing carving the final runes. Aldric Caledon, Alpha, who gave himself into the abyss for the pack. Elowen read slowly, feeling every word like a thorn. The beta made a speech, spoke of courage, of leadership, of battles won. He said Aldric had ensured Caledon's safety, that his name would echo as long as there were wolves under that moon. Voices rose in response, long howls full of pain and gratitude. Elowen remained silent. When the ceremony ended, some approached the stone, touched it with respect, murmured words of farewell. One by one, they returned to the castle until the circle was nearly empty. Elowen knelt before the stone. The ground was cold, her hands even colder. She placed her palm over his name, tracing the letters as if she could pull him back that way. Tears began to flow, silent. The wind responded with a stronger gust, messing up her hair. She rested her forehead on the stone, shoulders shaking. For a brief instant, she felt something strange in her chest, as if her magic heart gave a stronger pulse, defying its own curse. The idea first came as an uncomfortable whisper. On the second night, a persistent whisper. On the third night, it was a scream. Elowen went to the stables before dawn. In the stable, the horses shifted, stomping hooves, breathing clouds of steam in the morning cold. She ran her hand along the neck of a white mare. The animal brought its muzzle to her palm, sniffing, accepting her. "You wanted to be running out there too, right?" she murmured to the mare. "She prefers the world out there to the castle drama, for sure," commented a voice behind her. Elowen turned, heart pounding. Hans was leaning against the door frame, supported by a makeshift crutch, the cut on his eyebrow already beginning to scar. "Shouldn't you be sleeping?" he asked. "And shouldn't you be, I don't know." "Sleeping too?" she retorted. "I tried," he sighed, decided to take a walk. He approached, eyes lowering to her hands on the reins. Running away? The question came without condemnation, just statement. Elowen took a deep breath and nodded. Hans held the mare's muzzle for a second, stroking between its ears, as if thinking through that gesture. You don't even know where to start. It wasn't an accusation. It was pure concern. Hans breathed deeply and extended something to her. Water, dried food, a dagger, some coins. She stared at him, surprised. You knew I was going to. Of course I knew. He rolled his eyes. The two stared at each other for a second, a mixture of laughter and pain locked in their eyes. But the gesture died when his leg faltered slightly. I'm sorry I can't go with you. This leg of mine won't even get me to the tavern. I'd only slow down the search. Hans sighed, resigned. The north gate has less traffic at this hour, he said, practically. Thank you. The word came out loaded with everything that didn't fit there. He gave a crooked smile. Don't thank me yet. When you come back, I'm going to write a horrible ballad about this. You will deeply regret having survived. I can hardly wait. She pulled her hood over her head. Hans released the horse, giving a light pat on the animal's flank. The world beyond Caledon seemed empty without Aldric. Elowen rode all day, body aching, but mind on fire. She stopped in small villages, asked about anything strange. No one knew anything. She followed tracks that soon dissolved, scents that weren't his. She followed known trails, passed through clearings, crossed streams. The sun crossed the sky in silence, and as the afternoon fell, exhaustion began to weigh on her. When the sky began to tinge with purple, Elowen pulled the reins, facing the distant tree line. A few more hours, she murmured to the mare, and we stop. I promise. The mare snorted as if accepting the deal. The forest thickened around them, swallowing the remaining daylight little by little. Finally, when night was already spreading among the treetops, Elowen dismounted in a small clearing. She tied the mare to a low trunk, unrolled the saddle blanket, and improvised a simple camp. A small fire, her cloak serving as a blanket, a piece of hard bread divided in two, half for her travel companion. The wind began to pick up. It blew through the trees like a whisper, whistling in tongues she didn't know, calling her. If I survive this, I'll reward you with a great meal, she promised the mare, who chewed with a patient air. The mare flicked her ears, indifferent. Elowen let herself fall into a sitting position, back against a tree, gaze lost in the flames. Slowly, the day's fatigue tried to pull her into a restless sleep. It was then that the wind changed. From a cold breath, it turned into a decided shove, almost an invisible hand passing through the trees. The embers of the fire danced. The mare raised her head, restless, pulling lightly on the rope. The wind spun through the clearing, twirling, and in a quick, cheeky gesture, grabbed the hat from her head. A small fox, with dense reddish fur, appeared out of nowhere, crossing her path with lazy elegance. The hat, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, landed right in front of the animal. The fox sniffed the hat once. Elowen stopped, chest rising and falling fast. Don't even think about it. The fox looked at her. Then, with all the calm in the world, it clamped the hat by the brim and trotted into the forest. Hey! Elowen bolted after it. That's theft. The fox didn't run like a scared animal. This was a fox of the enchanted forest, and the things it stole weren't what normal foxes would take. It ran like someone who knew exactly where it was going, always a few meters away. Too fast for Elowen to catch, slow enough so she wouldn't lose sight of it. The forest changed around them. A few meters ahead, it stopped at the foot of a twisted tree and dropped the hat. The wind, as if an accomplice, blew once more. The hat flew again, rising through the branches until it snagged on a higher limb. Right at the edge of a drop in the terrain, the branches leaned in. The flowers watched her from the corners of their eyes. The entire forest in that moment seemed to be trying to communicate. Elowen arrived panting, casting a dangerous look at the fox. That was mean. The animal just tilted its head as if amused, and then disappeared into the shadows, vanishing without a sound. The hat dangled a few meters up. Caught in a tangle of branches, Elowen climbed onto the exposed root of a tree, stretching her arm. Her fingers brushed the brim, but not enough to grab it. She propped her foot on a small protrusion of the trunk, risking a little more height, the other hand holding onto a side branch. The wind blew again, swinging the hat even further away. You're kidding me, she grumbled through her teeth. In a last attempt, she leaned further than was sensible. Her fingers finally closed around the brim. At the exact instant she gripped the hat, the branch under her foot cracked and the world tipped. She slipped, lost her footing, tried to grab anything, found only damp leaves and a thin twig that snapped in the same second. The ground disappeared beneath her. For an instant she only felt the void. The next moment she felt the water. The impact wasn't violent, not enough to hurt her seriously, but the shock of the cold water tore the air from her lungs. Elowen sank a few feet, the sound of the world turning into a blur. The lake stretched out before her, calm, silent, the banks surrounded by trees that leaned over it like guardians. The hat floated a few meters in front of her, spinning slowly. Elowen swam to the bank, feeling her clothes clinging to her body. She placed her hands on the edge of earth and roots, pulling her body out, soaked and panting. The hat, more obedient now, touched the bank with a small wave and stayed there, as if nothing had happened. That was when she realized. She knew this place. It was the Mirror Pool. The same lake where she had found Aldric for the first time. Her heart tightened, a pain beautiful and strange at the same time. She knelt on the bank, knees sinking slightly into the damp earth. Elowen blinked, air vanishing for a second. There, in the lake's mirror, standing behind her, where in reality there was no one, was Aldric.
Chapter 10. Aldric. When the brightness dissolved, I was still standing. I looked up. The battlefield was still there, but it seemed a little distant. It was like observing the world through a thick pane of glass. Morgana possessed the power of mirrors, and she had sent me to an inverse world, the Mirror Realm. Slowly, I began to understand the rules. Wherever there was something that reflected, I saw the world with greater clarity. The gleam of a blade, the polished metal of a helm, a puddle of water, a piece of ice on a stone. Any mirrored surface worked as an anchor point. I remained whole, but the world did not touch me. Nor did I touch the world. I returned with my army to Caledon, attached to the shine of the moat around the walls, to the reflection of fire on polished armor surfaces, even to the worn varnish of an old window in the east tower. They arrived at the courtyard. I arrived with them. Hans shouted orders. The Beta organized the wounded. Soren chained limped between two warriors. Morgana walked with silver shackles on her wrists. I found Elowen again that same night, in the reflection of the large mirror in my room. Our room. The surface returned the image of an occupied bed, not by an exhausted warrior, but by a girl made of petals and spells, sitting on the edge of the mattress, feet barely touching the floor, light fingers brushing the bluish marks that were beginning to spread from her neck to her shoulder. She stood up, went to the mirror, stopped right in front of the frame. I stood on the other side. She looked at her own reflection, and I took a step forward, approaching as close as the surface allowed. My hand was inches from hers, separated by invisible glass. From the outside, she placed her palm on the mirror, as if wanting to lean her body weight there. Our hands coincided, each in a different world. "Elowen," I called, voice firm. "I am here." But she didn't hear. I watched the council discuss my absence through the reflection of the polished table. I saw the elders suggest my headstone through the shine of wine goblets. I saw Hans fight on my behalf, hands trembling slightly as he held a map. I watched the decision to take my name to the stone circle. And that night, I watched when Elowen headed to the stable. Hans arrived shortly after. Running away? I'm going to look for him. I couldn't interfere with words, but part of me approved of the choice. I didn't want her staying in Caledon waiting for a headstone to cool. I wanted her to move, to irritate the forest with questions, for the forest to bring her to me. Hans ended up helping. Water, food, dagger, instructions about the north gate. I watched them from the shine of the metal buckle on the saddle. She left. I followed her in the only way possible. When she galloped under the sun, I used the light on the blade of the dagger at her belt, the fleeting shine of a stream, the smooth surface of a stone polished by water. I accompanied her in every moment. When she reached the forest, the wind grew stronger. I felt its distortion even on this side, as if the world were pushing against the lake's surface with more force. I watched her hat fly. It wasn't a coincidence. Magic always responds to some will. Foxes too. I used her dark gaze as a mirror for a while, until the vegetation became too dense. Then I clung to puddles, pieces of wet rock, anything that reflected. The forest guided her to the mirror pool, where I had found her for the first time. I called her. I didn't raise my voice out of desperation. I raised it because I needed the world to feel I was there. Then I slammed both hands onto the surface. On my side, it sounded like striking smooth stone. On her side, The water trembled in soft circles. For a brief instant, her gaze seemed to focus behind herself in the reflection, right where I was, and there, reflected in the water, finally our eyes met.
Chapter 11. Elowen. He called again, and the water trembled. She didn't hear the exact sound of the voice, but she felt it. The world hung in suspension. Leaves stopped falling. The wind, which until then had blown sideways, skirting the clearing, retreated, as if holding its breath. For a moment, too long, nothing happened. And then, another presence watched. If it had a face, neither of them saw it. If it breathed, the air was unable to notice. The wizard observes everything that happens in the forest. He has the power to influence, manipulate, interfere, and gather elements to create situations he considers beneficial. He sets things in motion and is capable of conversing with any bird, gnome, ogre, sylph, and of course can easily convince a sufficiently vain fox to steal someone else's hat. The wizard has a special interest in those who pass through the forest, whatever their purpose. You can ask him for magical help if you are in trouble. The wizard is foresightful when it comes to adventures happening in the forest, and what seems inexplicable and problematic to you might be simple to him. He wasn't the type to watch without interfering, especially when situations defied the laws of nature. Morgana's spell ran counter to everything he considered right. It was to Aldric that Oberon whispered directly, his ethereal voice infiltrating the world of reflections, a phantom murmur in his ear. "Who is it?" Aldric's voice came out firm, but not harsh. It was more exhaustion than threat. The laugh that answered was light, familiar to the entire forest. "An old man who meddles where nature is contradicted," replied the presence. "Oberon, if you wish to name things." "What do you want from me?" Aldric asked simply. The wizard seemed to smile, satisfied with the direct question. "I can free you, but in return I want you to make her real. Elowen, my creation," he said. "And there is only one thing that makes someone truly real. Being loved back. You give it the complicated name of true love, but, if you prefer, we can call it that. It sounds prettier." Aldrich swallowed hard. "And how do I do it?" Oberon's whisper then decided to indulge in poetry. "Where hearts are still, make them beat anew. Where souls connect, unbound, sincere, the hidden heart will finally hear. If a kiss is just for desire's sake, the magic fades, the spell will break. But love beyond the mirrored face will bring the heart to its true place." The roots under the earth moved. The lake, which until then had served as an obedient surface for Morgana's trick, shook for a second. It was not in water's nature to be glass. The wind returned, this time from above. It descended through the canopy, tearing leaves, swept the clearing in a circle that closed over the lake. The water vibrated like a string drawn too tight. From the outside, the lake ceased to be a mirror for an instant. The reflection blurred, lost its edges. The world complained. Luminous cracks appeared in the water, like fissures of white light opening in all directions. With every breath Elowen took, the fissures widened. With every strike of his hand Aldric dealt from the inside, the resistance lessened. The forest wasn't against Morgana, nor was it in favor of Aldric. The forest watched everything with impassive neutrality, but it was, above all, tired of being used as a frame for spells that were not its own. The water burst from the fissure, and Aldric's hand emerged solid, dripping reflections. Fingers touched Elowen's skin. She let out a sob, surprised, and almost pulled back, but knew what to do. Elowen pulled him from the lake with all the strength she didn't know she possessed. His weight hit Elowen. The two rolled backward, away from the bank, Aldric's body soaked and heavy atop hers. He coughed once, twice, as if he had truly swallowed an entire river. Sounds returned, the wind, the distant birds, the rustling of leaves. Aldric braced one arm beside Elowen's head, taking his weight off her body. The other continued holding her hand, as if he still doubted the contact would hold if he opened his fingers. He found her eyes, and the wolf in him recognized she was his mate. She always had been. "Elowen," he murmured, almost in relief, as if saying, finally. The echo of Oberon's whisper passed through memory. Love beyond the mirrored face. Aldric brought his face close and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her chin, and finally, cupping her face, said, "I, Aldric, Alpha King of Caledon, claim you as my mate, now and forever. For all eternity," he said, bringing his lips to hers. She responded with equal sweetness. A strange heat, concentrated in the center of Elowen's chest, spread through her ribs, her shoulders, her fingertips. It hurt a little, as if something inside her was stretching for the first time. She pulled her face back just enough to catch her breath and brought her hand to her own chest instinctively, their hearts beating in sync. Wait, heart? She didn't have a heart. But, it seemed, now she possessed one. Elowen held her breath, surprised, feeling the insistent thump beneath her own palm. Another. Each beat following, stubbornly, the firm rhythm coming from Aldric's chest, where her other hand still rested. The marks on her neck retracted, little by little, until only luminous, ethereal skin remained under the silvery light of the night. The leaves above their heads swayed, satisfied. The fox yawned, as if the outcome had been the only possible one from the beginning, and vanished into the bushes. The lake water, finally, returned to being just water. The forest then stopped looking. What happened to them from then on was the business of men, of the flower and the wolf. The balance had returned to a more acceptable place. 6 months later, the market between Moonfall and the Alpha's lands had become a tradition. Once a month, the packs gathered in a neutral field to trade goods, stories, and slowly, very slowly, build trust. Finally, there was peace between the territories. Elowen walked among the stalls, smiling at vendors from both sides. Eventually, she reached a stall selling musical instruments. Hans was there, naturally, testing a new lute. "This one is perfect," he was saying to the seller. "Oak wood, impeccable finish, the balance is." He saw Elowen and smiled. "Look who arrived to stop me from squandering all the castle's gold." "If you need me for that, we're lost," she replied, lifting the basket she carried on her arm slightly. He let out a laugh and agreed, handing the lute to the seller with instructions to deliver it to the castle. "Aldric is looking for you, by the way. Is he? Something about where is my mate and how does she get lost in a market?" Hans imitated his brother's deep voice perfectly. Very dramatic. Elowen rolled her eyes but felt warmth spread through her chest. Even after 6 months, it was still surreal. She was the Alpha's mate. She found Aldric near the meat stalls, talking to a knight about patrols. When he saw her, his entire face softened, an expression he reserved only for her. "Lost?" he teased as she approached. "Exploring," she corrected. He slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her to his side in a gesture that had become natural. "Ready to go home?" he murmured against her hair. Home. That word still made her smile. "Yes," she said, leaning on him. "Let's go home." As they walked together back toward the forest, the sun setting behind them, Elowen looked back one last time at the market, the colorful stalls, the mixed voices, the smell of fresh bread and spices, people laughing, haggling over prices, children running between adults' legs. It was real, very real. Aldric squeezed her hand lightly, as if answering a thought she hadn't spoken aloud. The flowers by the roadside watched them, recognizing them. The forest whispered, no longer calling her back to what she had been, but greeting what she had become. Elowen knew she would always be welcome there, but she also knew her place was elsewhere now. Like a flower instinctively curling toward the sun, she leaned toward Aldric. And there, between the road, the forest, and the sun he represented, she found the exact place where she could exist wholly. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. It was a little different from the others. I wrote it more like a tale. Tell me in the comments what you thought. And if you'd like to support the channel, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.
Barefoot on a moss soft trail, every flower